The moment Carter Hayes stepped off the shuttle onto the newly established colony world of New Sol, he felt the weight of expectation. The summit was a big deal, an opportunity for humanity to showcase its potential on the galactic stage. Carter wasn't the diplomatic type. He wasn't even technically an official ambassador, just a military attaché sent to represent Earth's interests and keep a close eye on the political atmosphere. "I thought you said this place was supposed to be fully terraformed," said Simon Hall, Carter's partner on this mission and longtime friend. Simon was a civilian consultant, smooth-talking, well-dressed, and good at reading people, all the things Carter lacked. "It is," Carter replied, glancing at the rolling green fields and domed habitats dotting the horizon. "It just needs more time." Simon raised an eyebrow. "If you say so. Looks more like a giant science experiment than a colony." As they made their way toward the main conference building, the air buzzed with excitement. Delegates from dozens of species mingled in the courtyard, some towering over the humans, others hovering on delicate wings. The Quahiri delegation caught Carter's eye immediately. The Quahiri were tall, elegant beings with smooth, iridescent skin that seemed to shift colors depending on the light. At their head stood Aliena, their most celebrated diplomat. She was difficult to miss, poised, confident, and utterly captivating. "I read her dossier," Simon said quietly, noticing where Carter's gaze had drifted. "Aliena of the Quahiri. They call her the finest envoy in the Federation. Don't get too attached." "Why would I get attached?" Carter muttered, tearing his eyes away. "I'm here to keep an eye on things, not get involved." "Sure," Simon said, smirking. "Because you're known for minding your own business." Before Carter could respond, a smooth voice called out, "Excuse me, are you Lieutenant Carter Hayes?" They turned to find a tall, pale-skinned figure standing before them, their gold-embroidered robes glittering in the sunlight. The figure gave a formal bow. "I am Hithri of the Golyari delegation. Aliena wishes to speak with you." Carter blinked. "Aliena? Why?" "Perhaps she sees the value in building a rapport with humanity's representative," Simon quipped, adjusting his jacket. "Don't keep her waiting." The Quahiri envoy stood near the entrance to the conference building, engaged in conversation with a few other Federation diplomats. As Carter approached, her gaze shifted to him, her silvery eyes narrowing slightly. "Lieutenant Hayes," she said, her voice smooth but tinged with curiosity. "I've heard much about you." "Hopefully not too much," Carter replied, trying for a friendly tone. He extended a hand, unsure if the gesture would be understood. Aliena hesitated, then took it briefly, her touch cool and surprisingly delicate. "I wanted to meet the human who helped secure this summit's location," she said. "It was no small feat to convince both your government and the Federation Council." Carter shrugged. "A lot of back and forth, but nothing compared to what you do on a regular basis, I'm sure." Aliena's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "Your humility is refreshing, if unusual. Perhaps we can discuss matters further during the evening reception." Carter exchanged a glance with Simon, who nodded slightly. "I'll be there," he said. The rest of the day passed in a blur of introductions, speeches, and awkward small talk. Carter did his best to navigate the cultural minefield, but it was Simon who truly shone in social settings, gliding between groups and leaving them smiling in his wake. "Is it just me?" Simon said as they stood on the conference building's balcony that evening. "Or does this place feel tense?" Carter frowned. "You mean the delegates?" "Yeah, there's something beneath the surface. I can't quite put my finger on it, but some of these species aren't as happy about this summit as they pretend to be." Carter leaned on the railing, watching the delegates mingle below. "Could be nerves. This is a first for a lot of them." Simon shook his head. "It's more than that. Keep your eyes open. Something tells me this isn't going to be as straightforward as we were led to believe." Carter didn't argue. He'd learned long ago that Simon's gut instincts were rarely wrong. Chapter 2. The Contest. Carter squinted at the massive holo display looming over the conference chamber. The screen flickered to life, revealing the summit's first cultural exchange challenge. The contest was introduced as a friendly competition, one that would allow each species to demonstrate its unique capabilities. Yet, as the rules were outlined, it became clear that friendly might be a generous description. Simon, standing beside Carter, leaned in and muttered, "You've got to be kidding me. Are they seriously calling this a diplomacy exercise? It looks more like an obstacle course for egos." Carter smirked. "Egos or not, we're here. Might as well see it through." Aliena was announced as the Quahiri competitor. Her arrival was met with enthusiastic applause and a shimmer of approval from the Federation delegates. She stepped forward with a graceful bow, the light catching on her iridescent skin, turning it a striking shade of deep blue. "Your turn," Simon whispered, nudging Carter. "Show them what humanity's got." Carter hesitated. "I'm not exactly dressed for this." Simon grinned. "Who cares? It's not a fashion show." The first round was straightforward, a strategic puzzle meant to test critical thinking and creative problem-solving. Aliena moved with precision, her fingers gliding across a digital interface, unlocking solutions almost as quickly as they appeared. The crowd murmured in admiration. Carter, meanwhile, approached the task with a more unorthodox style. Instead of following the expected patterns, he improvised, trying out combinations that seemed random at first glance. When his screen flashed success, it drew a mix of surprise and curiosity from the audience. "Not bad, Carter," Simon called from the sidelines. "You might just keep up with her." Aliena's silvery gaze flicked toward Carter as they walked back toward the waiting area. "You think differently than most. It's intriguing." He shrugged. "Sometimes you have to see the whole picture instead of just the pieces." Her lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Perhaps. Let's see if your unconventional methods carry you through the next round." The second challenge was far more physical, navigating a simulated disaster zone to rescue holographic survivors. Aliena excelled at this as well, her agility and training evident as she moved through the environment with a level of efficiency that Carter couldn't match. But what he lacked in grace, he made up for in creativity. When one of the rescue points turned out to be inaccessible through normal means, he improvised by repurposing a damaged drone to carry a grappling cable. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Simon met him at the exit, clapping him on the back. "I knew you'd find a way." That was classic Carter, fixing the problem no one else even saw. Carter glanced over at Aliena, who had already completed the challenge. She stood by, her arms folded, watching him with an unreadable expression. "I think she's starting to notice you," Simon added with a grin. "Not sure that's a good thing," Carter muttered. "I didn't come here to compete with her." "Well, you're doing it anyway, and you're not doing half bad." The final event of the day was a cultural presentation. Each species brought something to showcase. A song, a dance, a piece of art. Aliena's performance was flawless, a mesmerizing display of Quahiri light manipulation that left the room in stunned silence. Carter couldn't hope to match it in technical complexity, but when it was his turn, he took a more personal approach. He told a story, an old Earth tale about a village coming together to overcome a storm. The story wasn't flashy, but the simple, heartfelt delivery struck a chord with the audience. When he finished, there was a beat of silence before the room erupted into applause. Even Aliena looked impressed, her usual composure briefly broken by a flicker of surprise. Back in the waiting area, Aliena approached him. "Your story, it was unexpected. I see now why your people are known for their ingenuity." "I'm just trying to keep up," Carter replied. "You've set a high bar." "Perhaps," she said, studying him carefully. "But you're not far behind." Simon, ever the observer, watched the exchange with a knowing smile. "You're making friends, Carter. I knew you had it in you." "Friends might be a strong word," Carter said, though he couldn't ignore the growing sense of camaraderie he felt with Aliena. For the first time, he wondered if this contest could be about more than just winning. Chapter 3. The Unlikely Allies. The sun was setting on New Sol, casting a reddish hue over the conference complex and the surrounding fields. Carter stood on a high observation deck, gazing out at the alien landscape. Simon leaned on the railing beside him, arms crossed. The day's events had been long and strange, filled with both triumph and tension. "Something's brewing, Carter," Simon said quietly. "You feel it too, right? This whole summit isn't just about sharing dances and stories." "Yeah, I feel it," Carter replied. "But what can we do about it? We're just here to observe and represent. Maybe it's time to do more than just observe." Before Carter could respond, a loud alarm blared through the complex. Lights flickered. A voice came over the intercom, speaking in the Federation's trade language. "Attention, environmental breach detected. All delegates please proceed to secure zones immediately." "What now?" Carter muttered. He and Simon exchanged a glance, then turned and rushed inside. Delegates hurried past, some shouting questions, others already heading for designated safety zones. Elena appeared down the hall, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos. Carter and Simon approached her as she issued instructions to members of her delegation. "Do you know what's happening?" Carter asked. "A containment field failed," she replied. "A storm front from the planet's untamed southern hemisphere is moving in fast. If it reaches us, it could damage the colony's infrastructure and endanger everyone here." "What can we do to help?" Simon asked. Elena hesitated, then gestured to a nearby console. "This terminal should allow us to reinforce the shielding in this section. I need someone who understands human interface protocols to assist." Carter stepped forward. "I'm on it. Simon, can you keep an eye on the delegates? Make sure everyone gets to safety?" "Got it," Simon said, heading off into the crowd. As Carter joined Elena at the terminal, he noticed how efficiently she worked. Her long fingers flew across the holographic keys, pulling up complex diagrams and energy readings. "Can you reroute power to the secondary generator?" she asked, barely looking up. "On it," Carter said, quickly accessing the interface. He navigated through menus, rerouting energy streams while Elena adjusted the field alignment. The air grew warmer as the storm's pressure began to affect the interior atmosphere. "I think I've got it," Carter said, locking in the changes. The field's energy level steadied, but the readings were still unstable. "Not enough," Elena said. "We'll have to manually align the emitters." "Where are they?" Carter asked. "Through that corridor," she said, nodding toward a sealed door. "Lead the way," Carter said, motioning for her to go first. They hurried down the corridor, passing flickering lights and the occasional startled delegate. The hum of the failing containment field grew louder as they approached the emitters. Inside the emitter room, a series of large, cylindrical devices lined the walls. Elena immediately began adjusting one of the emitter's control panels. Carter moved to another, following her instructions to manually realign the output frequencies. "This one's jammed," he called out. "I can't get it to respond." Elena joined him, inspecting the device. She reached out, her hand brushing against his as they both tried to unlock the mechanism. For a moment, Carter was acutely aware of her presence. Her calm yet determined expression, the faint shimmer of her skin in the dim light. "Try bypassing the regulator," she said softly, her tone steady despite the rising tension. He nodded, focusing on the task. After a few tense moments, the emitter sprang to life, and the field's energy readings stabilized. Elena turned to him, a small smile of relief on her face. "Good work," she said. "Same to you," Carter replied. "We make a decent team." Before Elena could respond, Simon's voice came over the comm. "Carter, Elena, we've got a group of delegates who didn't make it to the secure zones. They're stuck in a wing with partial shielding. Can you help?" Elena looked at Carter. "Let's go." Together, they ran back into the complex. The storm's pressure had begun to affect some of the building systems, and faint tremors shook the floors. They found the stranded group, representatives from several smaller species, huddled in a hallway. Elena quickly took charge, her calm voice reassuring the frightened delegates. "We'll escort you to a safer area," she said. "Follow us closely." Carter led the group while Elena kept watch, her sharp eyes scanning for any signs of danger. They moved quickly, avoiding weakened sections of the structure. Simon joined them halfway, helping a delegate who had twisted an ankle. Together, the three of them managed to get everyone to a reinforced section of the building just before the storm struck full force. As they sealed the doors and the containment field held, the delegates began to relax, thanking Aliena and Carter profusely. Aliena turned to Carter, her gaze steady. "You didn't have to risk yourself," she said quietly. "But you did." "Same to you," Carter replied. "I guess we've got more in common than we thought." For the first time, Aliena's smile reached her eyes. "Perhaps we do." Chapter 4. The Cultural Exchange. Carter glanced down at the small wooden box in his hands. It wasn't much to look at, just a plain, hand-carved container with a sliding lid. But the contents inside held years of tradition. He hoped it would make a decent impression. Simon, standing nearby, gave him a thumbs up. "You sure about this?" Carter asked. "Absolutely," Simon said. "It's simple, but that's the point. The Quahiri respect authenticity." "I'm not trying to win points," Carter said. "I just don't want to look like an idiot." "That ship's already sailed, my friend," Simon replied with a grin. "But if it helps, this might actually work. Go out there and give them something real." Aliena stood in the middle of the gathering chamber, her elegant form poised under the soft glow of the overhead lights. She had just finished her presentation, a stunning visual display of Quahiri art. Using a specialized device, she'd created shifting, luminous patterns in the air that told a story of her people's history. It had been breathtaking, and the audience of delegates from across the galaxy had been captivated. Now it was Carter's turn. He stepped forward, box in hand, and cleared his throat. Hi, I'm Carter Hayes. I'm not much of an artist, but I wanted to share something from my family's traditions back on Earth." The room was silent. All eyes, both human and alien, were on him. Carter carefully opened the box and removed a small, intricately carved wooden figure. It was shaped like a bird with wings outstretched, its surface worn smooth from years of handling. "This is a carving my grandfather made," Carter explained. "In our family, we pass these down through generations. It's not just a decoration. It's a way of remembering where we come from." He held it up, turning it so everyone could see. "I know it might not look like much next to the incredible things you've all shared. But for us, it's not about perfection or beauty. It's about connection between past and present, and between each other." A murmur went through the crowd. Aliena watched intently, her silver eyes locked on the small wooden figure. Carter wasn't sure if she was impressed or just puzzled. "I'd like to leave this here," Carter continued, "as a gesture of goodwill and mutual respect. It's a piece of my history, and I hope it shows that we humans have more to share than just technology or trade agreements." He placed the figure back in the box, closed the lid, and stepped back. The room was still for a moment. Then a round of polite applause began, growing steadily louder. Carter's shoulders relaxed slightly. As the delegates dispersed, Aliena approached him. "Your presentation was unexpected," she said. "Yeah, well, I figured I'd keep it simple," Carter replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's not every day you get to show a room full of aliens something from your family." "I admire your approach," Aliena said. "Many here try to impress with grandeur or complexity, but you chose authenticity." Carter smiled. "I guess we humans have our moments." Aliena's gaze softened. "You do. Perhaps you can tell me more about your family's traditions. I find them intriguing." "Sure," Carter said. "If you've got time, I'd be happy to." They walked together toward the courtyard, talking about Earth's customs and the stories behind the small wooden figure. Simon watched them go, leaning casually against a nearby pillar. He chuckled softly to himself. "Well, Carter," Simon said under his breath, "looks like you're starting to figure this whole diplomacy thing out." Chapter 5. The Dance of Worlds. The Great Hall of New Soul's Conference Center was bathed in soft, shifting lights, designed to mimic the auroras of Earth's polar regions. The audience buzzed with anticipation, delegates and dignitaries from 100 worlds awaiting the start of the evening's cultural showcase. Each species was given a chance to present something that embodied their heritage, their pride, their soul. Carter shifted uncomfortably in his seat near the back of the room. I still think this whole event is a little, I don't know, forced, he said quietly to Simon, seated beside him. It's a chance to show them who we are, Simon replied, adjusting his tie. Besides, we humans could use a little positive attention around here. Just try to enjoy it. Carter sighed and glanced at the stage. Aliena was preparing her performance. As the lights dimmed, she stepped forward with the poise and confidence Carter had come to associate with her. Her luminous skin caught the faint glow of the room's simulated starlight, making her seem otherworldly. Aliena began by explaining her people's traditional dance of remembrance. She spoke softly, her words translated into dozens of languages. This dance, she said, is not merely movement. It is a connection, an expression of who we are, of the bonds we hold sacred. As music unique to the Kwahiri filled the hall, Aliena moved. Her steps were graceful, each motion deliberate, every gesture a part of a larger narrative. Patterns of light accompanied her, shifting in response to her movements, weaving a story that needed no words. The room was silent but for the haunting melody and the soft hum of her light projections. Simon leaned over to Carter. She's good. Really good. Carter gave a small nod, unable to look away from the performance. Ali. Carter hadn't volunteered. He was never one for the spotlight. But circumstances and a little prodding from Simon had landed him the role of presenting Earth's contribution. Simon nudged him. All set, Carter? Yeah, as ready as I'll ever be. He stepped onto the stage, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. After Aliena's dazzling performance, his own offering seemed impossibly simple. In his hand, he held a guitar. Not a holographic instrument, not some alien creation, just an old acoustic guitar his grandfather had given him years ago. Hi, he began, his voice rougher than he intended. I'm Carter Hayes. I don't have a big light show or a legendary dance to share, but I do have this. He held up the guitar. It's an old Earth instrument, and it's been in my family for generations. The hall was quiet. Carter strummed the strings lightly, a warm, familiar sound filling the space. This is a song we play when we're gathering with family, when we're remembering good times. He started to play a simple tune, one his grandfather had taught him. The melody wasn't complex, but it carried a warmth, a sincerity that reached the audience. As he played, he began to sing softly. The words were in English, but the translator embedded in the conference system rendered the meaning clear. It was a song of home, of family, of longing and joy. Carter let himself get lost in the music, forgetting for a moment the crowd, the grandeur of the event. He just played. When he finished, the room was silent. He thought for a moment that maybe he'd misjudged the crowd. But then, slowly, the applause began. It wasn't the thunderous ovation Aliena had received, but it was genuine. Delegates from a dozen species stood, clapping, some even smiling. As Carter stepped down from the stage, Simon met him at the foot of the stairs. Not bad, Hayes. Not bad at all. I don't think it was what they expected, Carter said. Exactly, Simon replied. That's what made it work. Later, as the delegates mingled in the courtyard, Aliena approached Carter. Her expression was unreadable, but her tone was warm. Your performance was different. I'll take that as a compliment, Carter replied with a faint smile. It was, she said. You reminded me that art doesn't have to be elaborate to be meaningful. Sometimes, simplicity carries its own power. Thanks, Carter said, feeling a bit awkward under her gaze. Coming from you, that means a lot. Simon appeared beside them, holding a drink. Carter, you just became the first human in this summit to get a compliment from Aliena. I think that means you win. Aliena raised an eyebrow. Win what? I don't know yet, Simon said with a grin. But he definitely wins something. Carter laughed, shaking his head. For the first time that evening, he felt a little more at ease. Aliena stayed a moment longer before excusing herself, and Carter watched her go, wondering how one quiet song had changed the way she looked at him. Chapter 6. a moment of vulnerability. Carter sat in the dimly lit atrium of the conference center, nursing a cup of something that resembled coffee. It wasn't quite the real thing, but it was close enough. The evening's showcase had ended hours ago, and most of the delegates had either retired for the night or moved on to more private discussions. He was still trying to process the quiet praise he'd received from the Kwahiri envoy herself. He heard the soft sound of approaching footsteps and looked up to see Aliena. She walked toward him, her movements as fluid and deliberate as ever, though there was something different in her expression tonight. Less formal, more thoughtful. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, her voice lower than usual. "Not at all," Carter replied, straightening in his chair. "Just winding down." Aliena glanced at his drink. "Is that one of your human beverages?" "Sort of," Carter said, offering her the cup. "Want to try it?" She hesitated, then accepted the cup and took a small sip. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "It's different. Stronger than I expected." Carter chuckled. "It's not for everyone." She returned the cup to him and sat down in the chair across from his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Carter wasn't sure what to say, and Aliena seemed to be weighing her words carefully. Finally, she broke the silence. "Your performance earlier was remarkable," she said. "It was so simple, yet it touched something in the audience that many of us strive to reach." "Thanks," Carter said. "I guess sometimes the simple things can connect us better than all the flashy stuff." Aliena nodded. "It's something I've been thinking about. I spent years perfecting the techniques I demonstrated tonight. They are part of my people's history, and I wanted to honor that. But when I saw how the others responded to your music, I wondered if perhaps I have been too focused on perfection." Carter leaned forward slightly. "It's not about being perfect. It's about showing who you are. And you've done that. Your dance, your light displays, they're incredible. They're you." Aliena looked down at her hands, the faint shimmer of her skin catching the light. "But are they enough? I have always believed that by being the best, I could inspire others. But your performance showed me that sometimes being yourself is more powerful than being perfect." Carter hesitated, then reached across the table to place his hand gently over hers. "You are enough, Aliena. More than enough." She looked up at him, her silver eyes meeting his. There was no trace of her usual composure now. Instead, she seemed vulnerable, uncertain. "You have a way of seeing things differently, Carter. It's both unsettling and refreshing." "I just call it like I see it," he said softly. Her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Perhaps that is why I find you so intriguing." Carter felt his heart rate quicken, but he kept his voice steady. "I could say the same about you." They sat in silence for a moment, their hands still touching. Finally, Aliena drew her hand back and stood. "Thank you for speaking with me, Carter. It has been enlightening." Carter rose to his feet as well. "Anytime." She gave him a small nod, then turned and walked away, leaving Carter alone in the quiet atrium. He watched her go, his mind racing. For the first time since the summit began, he felt something more than respect or curiosity. He felt a connection, a real, genuine connection, with someone from a world so different from his own. Chapter 7, The Connection Deepens. Carter didn't know exactly when it happened, but at some point, he and Aliena had developed an unspoken understanding. They now sought each other out, not just in moments of crisis or during official events, but during quiet interludes, the rare times when the summit's bustling schedule slowed to a manageable pace. More and more, they spent these moments together, trading stories, insights, and shared silences. One evening, Carter found Aliena on one of the observation decks overlooking New Sol's rolling landscape. The twin moons cast long, pale shadows across the horizon. She stood with her arms folded, gazing out at the distant hills. Carter approached quietly, unsure if she'd heard him. "You keep finding the best spots," he said, his voice light. Aliena turned slightly, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "And you keep finding me in them." Carter stepped closer, leaning on the railing beside her. "I can't help it. You make a pretty good guide." I never intended to be one, she said. I only sought clarity. Well, you've got a knack for it, Carter said. Seems like every time I think I've figured you out, you surprise me again. Aliena tilted her head. Is that so? And how do I surprise you? Carter laughed quietly, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't know. It's not any one thing. It's the way you see the world, how you take all these big, complicated ideas and make them seem simpler, clearer. She glanced back out at the horizon. It's only because I'm trying to understand myself. I've spent so much of my life striving for perfection that I forgot what it means to be genuine. Carter leaned on the railing. You seem pretty genuine to me. Aliena looked at him, her silver eyes studying his face. You too, Carter Hayes. I have met many humans, but few who embrace imperfection as readily as you do. That's a nice way of saying I'm a mess, Carter said, grinning. She smiled back. Not a mess, just real. They stood there for a while, letting the conversation drift naturally. Carter couldn't help but notice how at ease Aliena seemed now compared to when they first met. She still carried herself with grace, still maintained the composure of a diplomat, but there was something more relaxed in her demeanor. Carter, Aliena said softly, do you ever think about what will happen after this summit ends? Yeah, he admitted. I think about it a lot. I'm supposed to go back home, back to my regular life. You'll go back to doing whatever it is you Kwahiri do when you're not dazzling people with your dances and light shows. Aliena chuckled, a rare sound that made Carter smile. It is a possibility, but I wonder if that is all there will be. What do you mean? I mean, perhaps there is more to this than just diplomacy. More to what we have built together. Her voice was quiet, thoughtful. Carter glanced at her, his heart skipping a beat. I think there could be, he said, his own voice equally low. The silence that followed was not awkward. It felt comfortable, like a pause in a conversation where words weren't necessary. Carter reached out, brushing his hand against hers. Aliena didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand, allowing their fingers to intertwine. Her touch was cool, smooth, but not distant. You know, Carter said, when I first got here, I never thought I'd end up sitting on a balcony, holding hands with an alien. Aliena tilted her head, a small, amused smile playing on her lips. And yet here we are. Yeah, Carter said. Here we are. They stayed that way for a while, their hands entwined, neither of them in a hurry to break the connection. Chapter 8. A New Spotlight. The summit's final ceremony was held in the Grand Hall, a space so vast it could have housed a starship. The air buzzed with anticipation as the last day of negotiations and cultural exchanges came to a close. Delegates and spectators gathered, seated in carefully arranged sections. At the far end of the hall, an expansive platform served as the stage where each species had shared their traditions and ideas over the past weeks. Carter stood backstage, watching as the Kwahiri delegation made their final preparations. Aliena moved with her usual grace, directing her team with quiet confidence. She glanced in his direction, catching his eye, and gave him a small nod. It was a subtle gesture, but it carried weight. He knew it meant something more than just a greeting. It was reassurance, a reminder of the bond they had built. You ready for this? Simon asked, stepping up beside Carter. He had been a constant presence throughout the summit, always ready with a wry comment or a steadying word when things got tense. As ready as I'll ever be, Carter said, adjusting the collar of his jacket. But I'm still not sure what they expect from me up there. Simon grinned. Just do what you've been doing. Be yourself. Tell them what it's been like, what we've learned. Carter nodded, though his nerves hadn't completely settled. He looked back at Aliena, who was now speaking with another delegate. She had been his closest ally throughout the summit, someone who challenged him, pushed him to think differently, and, most surprisingly, someone who had become more than just a professional acquaintance. The memory of her hand in his, the quiet conversations they had shared, stayed with him as he waited for his turn. When the announcement came, Carter stepped onto the stage. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight followed him to the center. He cleared his throat, looking out at the sea of faces, some familiar, others alien. He didn't have a script. All he had was the truth. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "and everyone who doesn't fall into those categories, my name is Carter Hayes. I'm not a diplomat. I'm not an artist. I'm just a guy who was asked to come here and represent humanity in whatever way I could." A faint ripple of laughter spread through the crowd, helping him relax. "When I first arrived at this summit, I thought it was just going to be a lot of speeches, a lot of handshakes, and a lot of sitting around waiting for decisions to be made. I didn't expect to meet people, real people, who would change the way I think about the galaxy and my place in it." Carter glanced over at Aliena, who stood in the front row, her expression calm but attentive. "I learned that even when we come from completely different worlds, we still have things in common. We all have traditions, we all have stories, we all have things we're proud of. And we all want the same thing, to connect." The audience was silent now, hanging on his words. Carter took a deep breath. "I think we all know this summit wasn't perfect. There were misunderstandings, moments where things didn't go as planned. But that's the point. We're not here because we're the same. We're here because we're different. And it's through those differences that we learn." He paused, letting his words settle. "If there's one thing I hope we take away from this summit, it's that we don't have to be perfect to come together. We just have to keep trying, keep reaching out. The galaxy's big enough for all of us." Carter stepped back, and the applause began. It started slow, building into a wave that filled the hall. He glanced at Simon, who was clapping along with a smirk that said, "I told you so." Aliena's expression was softer, more reflective. She inclined her head, her version of a silent "well done." After the ceremony, Carter found himself in the main reception area, surrounded by delegates offering thanks and congratulations. Simon joined him, clapping him on the back. "Not bad for a guy who claims he's not good at speeches." "Thanks, Simon. I'll take that as a compliment." "It was one," Simon said. "Seriously, you did good. And you know what? I think Aliena thought so too." Carter glanced over and saw her approaching, her silver eyes meeting his. She waited until Simon stepped aside, then said, "You spoke from the heart, Carter. That is a rare quality." "Well, I've had some good inspiration," he replied. "You've taught me a lot, Aliena. More than I think you realize." She smiled faintly. "Perhaps we've taught each other." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the summit, the shared experiences, the late-night talks under the stars, all of it seemed to come together in that quiet exchange. "Do you think we'll ever do this again?" Carter asked. Aliena tilted her head, a thoughtful look crossing her face. "I think there will be more chances. The galaxy is vast. Who knows what opportunities may arise?" Carter held her gaze, feeling the unspoken promise between them. They had both stepped into an uncertain future, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of what might come next. With Aliena at his side, he knew they could face anything.